Good evening, everyone. My name is Chitresh Kumar, and on behalf of Jindal Global Business School and Center for Asia Pacific Business Research, Economics and Innovation, I welcome you all to the 8th lecture of the Pandemic Lecture Series. Before we go ahead, I request you all to kindly ensure that your microphones are on mute. The title of today's lecture is Urban Mobility Post-Lockdown, and the lecture is being presented by Ms. Sarika Chakravarti. Sarika has nearly 2 decades of cross-sectional experience in urban infrastructure and transportation planning. Currently, she is working as a sector coordinator for the Master Plan of Delhi 2041 and the National Institute at the National Institute of Urban Affairs. It is also called NIUA, and sometimes it's considered as the main think tank for the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, Government of India. She has recently led a team of planners to develop the baseline for the transport, housing, and land use in Delhi while working at NIUA. And the baselines have provided vital information for developing specific strategies for the Master Plan of Delhi 2041. Prior to that, Sarika has been part of organizations like UNICEF and NCR Planning Board and has worked on projects funded by multilateral agencies like the World Bank and Japan International Cooperation Agency. Her transport planning experience includes metro station design, like Dwarka Sector 21, demand generation studies, transit-oriented development plans, mobility plans, and corridor improvement plans. She has worked in projects like planning and design for Kolkata East-West Metro Corridor, comprehensive mobility plan for Kolkata Metropolitan Development Area and Siliguri Jalpaiguri Development Area. She was also involved in preparation of the master plan of Jamshedpur urban agglomeration, and she has worked on the feasibility study for solid waste management of 8 towns of government of Kenya. Okay. Further, without wasting any more time, I request Sarika to go ahead with the webinar. Once again, I request all of you to kindly ensure that your microphones are muted during the webinar, and kindly send your questions via the chat window. We will be taking the questions by the end of the webinar during the question and discussion time. Okay, so over to you, Sarika. Sarika, you can start the presentation now. Your voice. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't know I was on mute. So I'm technologically slightly challenged. Anyway, good evening to you all. I would like to begin by thanking the Jindal Global Business School for inviting me to this webinar series. The topic of today's discussion, the presentation is of course urban mobility post-lockdown. We are all going through very uncertain times, and the biggest question which is being discussed nowadays is that what will happen after the lockdown is over. And what I perceive this as is that there will be a major paradigm shift in which, how the urban planning is actually envisaged in our cities. We were always, as planners, propagating the concept of compact developments, high densities with resource sharing. But now all that, it's being questioned whether high densities are really good, because with communicable diseases like the COVID, which actually spread by contact, such kind of high densities are not really very conducive for that. So what we see is that the COVID could be, this COVID pandemic would be here to stay for some time. Chitesh, this thing is not moving. How do I? Okay. So and as we see that since the last 3-4 months, we were hoping that we'll hit a plateau by now, but we are nowhere near that. And now it is in fact predicted that for the next 2 years, social distancing will be the new normal. And by December of 2020, 50% of Indian population could be infected by COVID-19. So what is it that as planners that we see? We see that there is psychologically the people are getting affected. There is uncertainty, isolation, anxiety in the minds of people. there is fear of traveling in public transport. So I am an avid public transport user, but now if I have to travel from Gurgaon to Delhi, I'll think twice before boarding the metro, and I'll perhaps prefer to travel by my car. So this is the thing which is happening. There is fear of public spaces as well. So in terms of transportation, what will happen? What we perceive is that the demand for private vehicles could grow exponentially. So there are some countries like London, which is saying that there should be a social distance norm of 2 meters. So what would that, translate as? So in terms of metro capacities, 15% drop of capacities would take place. In terms of bus capacities, 12% capacities, drop to the tune of 12% would take place. And this is the World Economic Forum data for London. And because in India we have larger densities, our public transport is more crowded, that's why I put that small little plus in front of those numbers, because these numbers could be much higher for India. In India, we are saying that a social distance of 1 meter is compulsory. So in terms of a metro, the metro services would have to be increased by 7 times. And the bus services would have to be increased by 5 times. So what will happen? So what we now see below is the typical cross section of an Indian road. Of course, we don't have the bicycle right of ways right now. So it's completely vehicular with some footpaths. And in fact, these footpaths are also quite less, because in Delhi, to the best of my knowledge, only 40% of the road lengths have pedestrian infrastructure. So what is going to happen? So the people who want to travel are going to actually opt for private modes of vehicle, of traveling. So that would be either the two-wheelers or the cars. So people would even shift from the public transport mode to private vehicles. So this kind of forced modal shift is something that we're predicting will take place. Now, as planners, what is it that we want to do? This is the scenario that we were actually, wanting this to happen. So if we improve the walking and cycling infrastructure, so the shift from public transport to private vehicles will in fact change to shift from public transport to cycling and walking. So what is it that works in our favor and what is it that doesn't? In a global scenario, cities are already making these changes to their transport infrastructure. London has already added miles of streets that have been declared car-free. Bogota, a city in Colombia, has actually added 76 kilometers of temporary bike lanes. New York City, cycling has spiked by 52%. In Philadelphia, again, 471% increase in bike traffic. And in Minneapolis, it is 18 miles of roads have been temporarily pedestrianized. So all these lower 3 cities, they are American cities, and America, as we all know, is a hugely car-dependent economy. So if they can make this kind of change, then why is it that we can't? So how would it be advantageous for us? From a citizen's perspective, last mile connectivity is something that bicycling would offer to us. Bicycling is, of course, affordable. We'll be able to maintain the social distancing norm, which is really critical in today's times of 6 feet distance. And of course, you will, avoid being stuck in these traffic jams if there are dedicated right of ways for cycling on our roads. From a planner's perspective, there would be reduced carbon emissions. We would have a greener city, cleaner city. The public money that is needed, we won't need to construct more infrastructure, transport infrastructure. And this money can perhaps be used for more, urgent needs like affordable migrant housing. Migrant crisis is something that we are all very aware of. Then reduced parking demand would also be there, because the bicycles do not require as much parking space, and infrastructure for bicycle parking can easily be made available on the footpaths or on the multi-utility zones of the street sections. So I would say that this pandemic is actually an opportunity to redefine our preferences. When we started off, you can see these black and white photographs, Mr. Devanand at the bottom with Nutan and another actress, which I don't know who she is anyway. But it started with that. So cycling was a fairly popular mode of transport post independence. Then during the 1992 liberalization, there was a sudden burst of vehicular sales, in automobile sales. The automobile finance was very readily available, in all that percolated in terms of, translated in terms of increase in two-wheelers and four-wheelers on the car. And that is what the panel in the center shows. But now is the time to define the new normal. And we can see in the picture on the top, we have our world global leaders like this Mr. Boris Johnson, who's the Prime Minister of UK cycling. Below we have our very own Mr. Kejriwal with Mr. Sisodia again cycling to work. So can this become the new normal? Can we actually bring about this behavioral change in the Indian, in how the Indian commuter travels? So unfortunately in India, bicycling is either a mode of livelihood. So it is the poorest of the poor who actually prefer cycling as their mode of transport, or it is a luxury thing, So it's just become a fashion statement. So people who are really rich occasionally take out their cycles and what would like to cycle. But what is generally questioned is that, is walking and cycling really possible in India? So what we have over years is very long average trip distances. The climate, of course, does not support this. It goes, the temperatures in summers go as high as 48 degrees centigrade. Then there's, of course, this undisciplined driving and high rate of accidents. You would have probably heard that Sunita Narayan, who's actually a big front runner in propagating cycling and all these green mobility measures in the city, she had a very bad accident because she was traveling to her work and she was sharing the right of way with the vehicular traffic. So our cyclists in Indian cities are at the moment extremely unsecure and unsafe. Like I said, we are sharing the right of way with multiple modes. So cycling, instead of a pleasurable thing, it becomes extremely difficult. And we are sharing the right of way with high network speeds. So imagine this is a picture from the Ames flyover. It's impossible to cycle in this kind of scenario when there's this high traffic which is buzzing past you. So in Delhi, how is it walking and cycling preferred now? Unfortunately, the cycling trips from 1980 to 2018 have now dropped from 18% to a mere 7%. This is a very recent 2018 data. So while the number of cycling trips are decreasing, what is encouraging is that walking trips are increasing. And walking trips are still a robust 34% of our daily person trips in Delhi. 50% of our metro users travel to or from the stations on foot. 58% of all education trips and 31% of all business and service trips are walking trips. So 60%, and what actually works in our favor is that 60% of all the trips have a trip length of less than 4 kilometers, and 80% of them are below 6 kilometers. So only 20% of our trips are those long distance trips, which those that have to perforce, resort to this vehicular or motorized mode of transport. So all these figures are very encouraging because 4 kilometers and 6 kilometers are definitely an ideal distance for walking and cycling. There is one thing that you all have to realize with walking and cycling is that there's a scale associated with walking and cycling. So Delhi being a city of 1483 square kilometers, with the width and the length being approximately 48 to 50 kilometers, x-axis and y-axis. So it is impossible to imagine that people are going to cycle that long distance. So but what works in our favor is that 80% of our trips are really short trips, and those trips can be converted as cycling and walking trips if we put the requisite infrastructure in place. So I see this as an opportunity for defining the new normal. We could adopt as a city pedestrian and cycling centric approach. We could have equitable road space distribution, thereby resulting in reduced congestion and reduced emissions. We could enforce improved safety norms, road safety norms, and of course we'll all benefit by it because we'll be all propagating or engaging in an active lifestyle, and we'll all have healthier bodies, healthier minds. So this would be a change for the better. So like Chitesh told you that right now I'm working with the National Institute of Urban Affairs, and we are preparing the master plan for Delhi 2041. Uh, Preparing the master plan of Delhi is essentially the mandate of Delhi Development Authority, but because an MOU has been signed between DDA and NIUA, NIUA is now supporting DDA in preparing this master plan. So, and master plan, as we all know, is a very powerful tool. It's a policy document which provides various frameworks within which development of the city can take place over the next 20 years. It's a powerful tool because it's supported in many court litigations and disputes referred to while preparing or formulating projects. One of the examples that I can give you now is, perhaps you're all aware of this Karol Bagh pedestrianization project. The entire commercial street of Karol Bagh has now been pedestrianized. So there was just this one sentence in the master plan which helped that project to get formulated and then get implemented. And the sentence, quote unquote, was, the gridiron pattern should be treated as an asset to regulate and pedestrianize the traffic movement. So just based on this one small sentence, that entire project fructified, and now it's serving the city, and everyone over there is happy. There's a intensive stakeholder engagement. The shopkeepers are happy because the sales have improved, and contrary to what was believed before, that the sales will drop because the vehicular traffic would be not allowed to come inside. So it's really worked in favor of Karol Bagh, and now other places like Lajpat Nagar, a plan is being made for that, to pedestrianize that market. So anyway, so that's what I wanted to say, that a master plan is a very powerful tool. So the master plan at present is now adopting a pedestrian first approach. And we are now recommending a comprehensive framework for planning and development of barrier-free pedestrian infrastructure, modal connectivity, and active public realm, offering safe and healthy mobility options for all residents, irrespective of age or ability, and enriching the overall urban experience in the city. So this is the vision for pedestrianization of the Master Plan 2041. For the first time in India, a walkability policy has been notified by Delhi Walkability Policy 2019. It's a multi-pronged strategy to enhance walkability. So what it actually recommends is that there would be need-based area level interventions. I will elaborate on that later. It would ensure that pedestrian safety would be premium, and it would be given the most priority. Generating public awareness regarding walking, that is extremely important to bring about the behavioral change and for people to accept the change. Greening would be an important element of all walk plans and street improvements. The master plan would actually be shaped by a set of policies. It's a policy document, like I first said. So there will not be 1 square inch area within the city of Delhi that would not have a policy that dictates the kind of development that would take place there. So policy level interventions are there that ensure that walkability as a planning outcome across all brownfield and greenfield developments in the city. 2/3 of Delhi is already developed, and we have 1/3 area of Delhi which is left in the 5 planning zones towards the west, northwest part of the city. And for all the brownfield developments, because there is no land left, and because the build stock is blighted, it's in a deplorable condition, it needs to be revamped. There are, in fact, one important data that came out of the baseline was that 45% of built Delhi is unplanned. So 45% of Delhi, which is built, is occupied by slums, by unauthorized constructions, unauthorized colonies. And of course, we know the conditions of these colonies. The build stock is highly compromised, and Delhi, unfortunately, also falls in the 4th seismic zone. So we are just waiting for one little, shift in the tectonic plates, and like a pack of cards, all these colonies would, fall. So redevelopment is the approach that we are adopting for all brownfield developments. Through redevelopment, we are hoping that these redevelopments would be area-based developments. No plot level redevelopments are allowed because redevelopments are FAR linked. So if you undertake a redevelopment, then you will get an incentive FAR, which will be over and above the base FAR. So for that, the only condition is that you have to amalgamate a certain plot of certain size of land, and only then you can undertake redevelopment. So that once these redevelopments take place, we are hoping that through these redevelopments and through other dictates of our policy, there would be walkable infrastructure which will be constructed through all these redevelopment areas. And this walkable infrastructure would be open to public. So everyone, so if you can see this images on the right hand side, these dotted lines show the pedestrian, walkable infrastructure which would be constructed and passing through all these private properties. So this is one of the mandated things. So what will happen? The city will become more walkable, and all these pathways will actually, in many cases, act as shortcuts. So because these act as shortcuts and because there is a shorter length of road to walk, people will perhaps choose to walk rather than hiring an auto rickshaw or taking their own private vehicle, which of course has a lot of issues related to parking and other things. So with the greenfield developments also, we have a set of additional development controls, which are like the form-based codes for the city, which also propagate a similar ideology. So these policies collectively would target the following. In each of these developments through redevelopment, there would be a mix of uses which will be created. So the entire entitled FAR would have a component of commercial and PSP, or what should I call it? Public and semi-public, the educational and health infrastructure FAR. So what happens is because of the mix of uses, the need to travel also gets reduced because within your building itself, you have a commercial thing and you have some, public, semi-public uses as well. Because of this pedestrian network which will get created, there'll be walkable block lengths which will be there and which will facilitate the walking environment. Accessible city transit and multimodal integration. One of the policies that we have worked on is the transit oriented development. So the city transit, the city stations will become more accessible because the pedestrian network density is going to improve around that. And of course, the multimodal integration. There'll be a pedestrian friendly urban form. So they'll be built to edge buildings and active frontages. What this also helps with is to provide a visual connectivity from the built form to the streets. So because of that, the streets will be safer. And again, like people would want to walk on those streets. There will be connected public areas, linkages between streets, open spaces, cultural spaces, and sites of historic and ecological interest. All this culminates into giving the highest priority to pedestrians in traffic and transport policies. What the master plan also does is propagate the concept of complete streets. This is a term that we've heard over and over again, which basically means that a street would facilitate movement of all. There will be equitable road, equitable right-of-way distribution. There will be multi-utility zones wherein the vending and kiosks and other such activities can be accommodated. There will be room for display of public art and other public activities, bus shelters, non-motorized transport, parking. The new thing that is there on the block, which is the e-charging infrastructure would be there. If there is not adequate space to park and charge your vehicle, then there would be those battery swapping centers where you can just swap your battery and move on. So that kind of infrastructure is being envisaged by the plan. And the plan also says that there would be walk plans which will be created. So all these area-based developments would have, it is mandatory to have a component of walk plans. So this redevelopments could be around the transit stations. These could be in form of layout, local area plans, layout plans in land pooling areas, and many such other plans. Walkable districts are something that the plan is going to identify. These walkable districts would be around the transport hubs, around the multimodal hubs, market areas, heritage precincts, and cultural hubs. So 400 to 500 meters around that, say approximately a walking distance of 5 to 10 minutes around that, we will have an intensive pedestrian network that will be created. Special projects, the master plan gives scope for creation of special projects at city level. So these will actually identify city level trails connecting heritage, cultural assets, ecological assets such as nalas, forests, biodiversity parks, etc. I'll speak on this more later. Yeah. So this is what it is. This is what that that we meant by these special projects. So one of the strategies that the master plan propagates is integration of blue-green infrastructure with key walking and cycling routes. So interestingly, Delhi has a huge blue-green asset inventory. We have almost 2,000 plus drains in total, 201 major natural and man-made drains, and we all know about the ridge, which is almost 7,784 hectares of ridge. And we also have some man-made greening, and in the form of 17,000 parks across the city. So the map on the right shows that. So what we are actually planning to do is that all these major drains could be, the floodplains could be developed as natural trails for walking and cycling and integrated with heritage and culture walks. So this will help to improve the use, of course, and these will help in creating high quality public areas in the city. So some of the examples that you see below, that there is this lake in France, and how beautifully the edge of the lake has been developed, so that there are some public areas which are created. There is a cycling track along with that. Another advantage of clubbing this blue green and putting the walking and cycling infrastructure within this blue green area is that it actually awards a level of safety to the cyclists, because that actually separates them from the vehicular traffic. So, and again, like I said, for walking and cycling, scale is important and shortcuts are extremely important. So this kind of network will create these shortcuts throughout the city. The master plan, of course, acknowledges the fact that we have to understand the user's receptivity to all the strategies that we propose. So citywide user surveys are being conducted. They're already being conducted. You can, on the right, you can see the web page that will shortly be hosted on the DDA website. It's called Reinventing Delhi, where every citizen of Delhi can actually go and contribute by saying what is their vision from the city, what are your aspirations from your city. So all these surveys will help us in spreading awareness. We will understand the user preferences, and through the participatory mechanism, we'll be able to understand what is it that the people feel, and the sense of ownership that people have towards the city, which is unfortunately lacking in Delhi, will then be developed. So MPD 2041 web portal is one such platform where we will be having these surveys. Now, because of our walkability policy 2019, which has recently got notified, certain projects have already got formulated. One of them is the Delhi Cycle Walk project, which has been, the RFP is out. Delhi Development Authority has actually made this, conceptualized this project. There are 3 legs to this project, with a total dedicated corridor for pedestrian and cycling, 65 kilometers length. This is both at grade and elevated, in form of shaded cycle walk pathways, tracks protected from the elements. So one of the leg A is the Tughlakabad area, leg B is the Sanjay Van JNU area, and leg C is this, excuse me. Okay, so is this Jahapana City Forest area. So what it actually does it, these walk networks, they also serve a functional purpose of connecting the metro stations, bus stands, high density residential areas, by creating a cycle walk corridor. It also serves a larger objective of making Delhi a city of connected forests and lakes, in line with our strategy of integrating the blue and green infrastructure of the city. There are many other measures also which are like apart from what the master plan does. Master plan is a long-term plan, 20-year plan for the city, but there are many short-term measures which can now be taken immediately without any kind of support from the master plan. It's only up to the will of the local bodies and local authorities to actually make this happen. So what we actually have to do is we have to introduce the cycling culture, and we have to bring about a behavioral change so that people think of cycling as a mode which is possible in Delhi. So incidentally, when the master plan team of NIUA got an opportunity to visit Delhi, and when we were interacting with the Transport for London authorities, there was this lady called Lily Matson. I remember her very categorically. She was the chief safety, health and environment officer. And when she came to the TFL office to give a presentation, she had this rucksack on her back, you know. And when the presentation got over and when we all came down, she opened that rucksack and she had this collapsible bicycle inside. And we all got so excited seeing that, and it just opened up and it was a bicycle. And then she bicycled to the metro station, and then she again would have perhaps collapsed that bicycle and carried it in her rucksack. So that is how people travel there. So why is it that we can't do that here? So there are very simple things that don't even require much investment to ensure that a certain right of way is reserved for the cyclists. There are certain, again, a very popular word that is making rounds is called tactical urbanism. So just by some colors or some paints, you can, dedicate a certain right of way from the vehicular right of way exclusively for either parking infrastructure or for, reserving it just for walking. Chennai city seems to have done that very successfully. So repurposing the existing right of way temporarily is something which is very, very doable and immediately doable. Another thing is staggered work hours of peak. So what happens is that generally there is a peak hour associated with transportation. Generally, it starts from around 7:30 to 10 in the morning, then around 5:30 to 7 in the evenings. So, so if we have staggered work hours, what will happen? We'll never hit the peak. So we'll flatten the traffic peak. This is a measure that can be actually, taken up. Then we can also propagate electric bikes. So like in the beginning, I said that our temperatures, our weather conditions are not conducive to walking and cycling. But then we could have battery operated or electrically charged, this kind of vehicles, Yulu bikes, they call it in Bangalore. We also have them in India now. And Yulu bikes in Bangalore, they already have a scheme wherein anyone can hire that bike on a monthly basis. So that's your private vehicle for 1 month. For, and it is such an excellent way because you don't have to pedal, and that physical exertion of, going from one place to another because of pedaling, you can actually overcome that. So weather will no longer be an excuse. Other things that can be actually done is that the employers can give incentives to their employees for cycling. And wherever you have these huge number of people coming or traveling by cycling, you could have stacked parking for cycling, like we have stacked parking for cars. But what happens, we'll of course need other infrastructure also, like we could need some shower facilities, because by the time you cycle and reach to work, you're perhaps not, in a condition to actually sit down and work, and you might need a shower before that. So that kind of infrastructure can also be built. There could be some other systems also that so that we can adapt and mainstream walking and cycling culture. So there could be apps for cyclists, like Map My Ride is one example. So in this, what happens is that all cyclists, they log on to that app, and as you're traveling, you could, after your trip is over, you could say that this is the most preferred route at the moment because there is less congestion on it. So this actually is something parallel to our Google apps, that we have for our vehicles and other modes also. But this actually shows the preferences from a cyclist point of view, that this is the route which is the safest and the most comfortable to cycle on. So that kind of apps could be there. Then, like I gave you this example of Lily Matson, metro, in our metros also we could allow cycles, you know, and there are metros wherein cycle parking, so there is allowed. So in Taiwan, this is one picture of a metro in Taiwan where there are special places where you can actually park your cycles. Uh, Bicycle parking is also something that we will have to provide at multiple places in the city. This public bicycle system in the cities that we are presently having, that may not necessarily work, really favorably for the kind of shift that we are planning to induce, because in that there are some limited routes that are marked. So you can pick up the cycle from, say, India Habitat Center and go to the Lodi Road metro station, but that's about it. You have to go there and you have to park and you have to submit or surrender that bike there. But what we need is, we need more flexibility in terms of movement and things, and only then bicycling will become a more popular mode. Okay, that's it. I hope you found it interesting. There are many such ideas which are, you know, there in the city, and we just have to make that change. Like I said, that this pandemic is an opportunity because there is fear in minds of people to take the public transport. So if by any chance, you know, we are able to, able to provide the infrastructure, make the small short-term changes, and make people fall into the habit of walking or cycling, then I think this is something which is very much doable. And in the long term, it will of course ensure that we have a more sustainable mode of transport. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarika, for such an informative presentation. I will ask a few questions, but before that, I will like to ask that if anyone has any question and they would like to go ahead, please, we will unmute you if you want to ask any question per se. Okay, so anyone has any question they would like to ask? Yeah, so Sherman has asked, I think, one question. I think he has asked your point of view regarding road safety for the cyclist, and that remains a very key aspect of overall biking experience. And from the experience of London as well as New York, the fatality rates of cyclists are pretty high in those cities. So what's your point of view about that?
No, of course, like I said, that is a major concern. Like I gave you the example of Miss Sunita Narayan, who had a major accident because she was cycling to her workplace. So until and unless we are able to, give dedicated right of way to the cyclists and ensure that their road crossovers, etc., are not are planned properly, which will ensure their safety. I don't think this will work. It is something which is a very worrisome factor, and generally it is only the cyclists or the non-motorized transport users who are affected by these traffic accidents the most. The fatality rate is highest amongst them. So I quite take your point. I mean, we'll have to put the infrastructure in place. Only then this is possible.
Yeah, so I think Priyanka has a question. I will unmute Priyanka and let her ask her question directly. Yeah, Priyanka, you can go ahead and ask the question.
Sarika, it was very nice presentation and very informative. I would like you to throw some light on PMDs, any laws associated with PMDs, because sometimes, most of the time, the PMDs also pose threats to the pedestrian. So, are you bringing any laws with that?
No, unfortunately, Priyanka, bringing the laws in are beyond the mandate of the master plan. But I think what we have presently is a walkability policy just for Delhi. If we have a national level walkability policy, based on that policy, some laws which actually safeguard the pedestrians and the cyclists, they could be formed, you know, in favor of them. So I think that could go in a long way to do that. But at the moment, I'm not aware of anything like that in Delhi.
I think Tushar has another question. Tushar, please go ahead with your question. I think you are unmuted. You can go ahead with your question.
I have a couple of questions. In fact, my experience with cycling networks, because I work with the smart city cities also. So there are almost 80 cities which have roughly say average of 5 kilometers or 6 kilometers. So 400 to 500 kilometers of cycling networks have been constructed in these cities. They might not have a well planned out network, but they have a network in place. And most of the cities have, when I see the kind of infrastructure they have built and the kind of interest people are taking in cycling, leaving apart 4 or 5 cities, I can count them on my fingers. The rest of them have not responded well. So my question, basic mood question is here that how do we incentivize people to take on cycling as an alternative transport system? Second, my question is that what will we do about older people and physically incapacitated people who have climbing difficulties and other kind of difficulties? Hello.
Yeah,
Hello.
thanks for the question, Tushar. How to incentivize cycling and walking? What is one way of doing that is that the employers can give some kind of an incentive to the employees. That is one thing which has been done and experimented in with many corporates, and it's worked well. Other than that, as city planners, I think it is a chicken and egg situation. If we create the infrastructure, will people use that infrastructure? Or should we wait for people to say that, yes, we need the infrastructure and then we build the infrastructure? So in my opinion, and also one of these World Bank blogs that I had read recently is that once the infrastructure is in place, it is better to put the infrastructure in place first, and then the behavioral change will keep happening. So as such, although there is no incentive that the city can give towards that, the master plan of the city, which is the policy document which dictates the development of the city over the next 20 years, can definitely incentivize creation of this infrastructure, the cycling and the pedestrian infrastructure. Your second question about physically incapacitated people, or the elderly, or whom we popularly call as the vulnerable group, we will of course have to when we talk about this concept of complete streets, we also say that these streets should be universally accessible, so people with different kind of abilities should be able to walk on those streets comfortably. There should be ramps with adequate slopes and things like that, etc. But in my opinion, with cities and with cities like ours, where the weather conditions are quite harsh, um, uh, the people who are in need of some kind of support will still continue to depend on the vehicular modes of transport. I work at India Habitat Center, and while going to the Lodi Road metro station, there is one Sardaji, and I had once clicked a picture and once tweeted about it also. So this Sardaji, he was on this he has this very swanky wheelchair. Okay, so I think it is electrically run because it runs at the speed of a say electric vehicle. So all that was good, but what was really worrisome is that Lodi Road, which is a premium area, which falls under the New Delhi Municipal Corporation, which is now funded by the Smart Cities program. Over there, because the slopes to access the footpath, the dedicated right of way for pedestrians, that slope is not proper. This gentleman was still in the vehicular right of way on his wheelchair. So that kind of things are something that we have to take care of.
I think Sarman has few questions, so I will unmute Sarman, and Sarman, you can go ahead and ask your questions.
Okay. Right. No, just a very minor observation. It was very good to see that some employers are now will provide for bicycle parking in their offices. But for everyday city bicycling, what has now happened is that even the markets no longer have places to park bicycles safely, unlike 20, 30 years ago. In fact, in the more upper end things like malls, etc., they do not even allow you to go in with a bicycle. You cannot even park it with the motorcycle. So it's almost an exclusion principle that you are a lesser mortal. So some of these basic things, you can go for a cycle ride, but if you're going for shopping, you need to park it somewhere. So even these little things sometimes come in. And the second observation I'd very quickly like to make is in a previous regime in UP, many kilometers of cycle paths were built in Noida, but they were disjoint. They did not necessarily lead one, connect one to the other. They were not intrusion free. So as a result, either they got disused or they were occupied as a free car parking space because they were already earmarked. So on paper, I'm sure it will still show that there are so many 100 kilometers of cycle paths in Noida, but nothing ever it didn't really benefit bicycling. So more of so a comment comes a question in these ways. Thank you.
Yeah, Shravan, it's a very valid point that bicycle parking is right now it's not provisioned in as part of our plan at all. So as a part of the master plan 2041, we are coming up with a parking policy. In that, we have categorically mentioned that all commercial parkings could be on street, could be off street, could be in form of the multi-level car parks that we have in our city. In that, a dedicated percentage has to be reserved for e-vehicles, because that is one thing that we want to propagate. Also dedicated parking spaces for bicycles, and all parking for e-vehicles and bicycles will be free, so that it will not be charged. So this is our way of incentivizing cycling. Going back to the question that Tushar was asking, enforcement of course remains a huge issue, that although you provide the infrastructure, how do you ensure that it's not getting misused? So that I think will remain an issue, and somehow the but one of the things also is that because for instance, these cycle parks that you're talking about in Noida, perhaps they were not used as frequently, so because of that, because they were not being used, people thought that this is a nice place to park their cars. So we also have to do this, like I told you, this participatory planning. We have to understand what is the perspective of the users, whether and how is it that we bring about a behavioral change. So this kind of soft things also we have to do in addition to provision of the hard infrastructure. So both these things will go hand in hand. Once the infrastructure is in place and once people are using it, then I think the probability of that infrastructure getting misused comes down to quite an extent.
I think Subhomoy has a question. So what I will do, Subhomoy, is that I will unmute you and you can ask the question. Okay. So Subhomoy, please go ahead.
Hi, Sarika. First of all, thank you so much for such an interesting talk. This really makes us think as to where we are headed and what changes we can make. My question is based on one of the insights, or I would say a classroom discussion, which I had with one of my students earlier in one of my classes. So we were discussing something of this sort, like encouraging cycling to work and things like that. Now, that student told me that if we encourage cycling or if we force cycling, then that is actually like putting paid to the aspirations of the people or of the common people who aspire for or who aim for cars in life or commuting to their work on car. And this is a fact that car often is considered as a status symbol in our country. So in the backdrop of this thing, how do we bring about a behavioral change in encouraging people to use cycles to commute to work or in general for commuting?
Okay, so this is like the root of the issue, that how do you actually bring about that behavioral change. But what I would like to inform you is that the younger generation, like all these youngsters who come to our office, most of them prefer to hire a house near a metro station. Why? Because they can easily use the public transport and come. Something like an ideology or something like a principle, they are now saying that we will not buy cars. So there is this sect of people, a small minority at the moment, but constantly growing, which is actually of the opinion that we do not want to buy cars. say no to cars. Okay, so this is something that we can. I can just look at this as a positive sign that yes, a change is happening. It will take time, and but as a city, there are many ways in which we can um, make buying of cars not that easy. What is happening is that although the master plan 2021, the prevailing master plan, it says that if you have to buy a car, you have to show that you have a car park, a place to park the car. But unfortunately, enforcement again being an issue, this thing just remains a line in the book, but it has never been implemented. But I think it's an excellent strategy. Singapore also has the similar strategy where you actually have to show that you have a car park. With every car that you purchase, you also get a ticket to for using it. So there is a timeline which is mentioned that for a certain number of hours in the day, only in that time window, you will be permitted to use the car. So if this kind of things are brought in the Indian cities, then automatically the purchase of cars will go down. Okay, and then of course people have to understand that this is they have to develop this sense of responsibility towards the city, towards the planet as a whole, that I have to use a mode which is a greener mode of traveling rather than a fossil fuel based mode of traveling. So this thing, I think over a period of time, this change will come about. I am quite hopeful about it. There are other things also that the master plan can do, such as, in some areas where you don't want people to bring cars, where the road widths are not adequate, where the areas which are closer to the transit stations, there are tools like congestion pricing, parking management, where parking tariffs are extremely high and there is enforcement that you can't park anywhere other than the official or authorized parking lots. So once all these things fall in place, they will help in bringing down the sales of cars. They will help in bringing about a modal shift in favor of public transport. So all these measures have to, go together. Only then this entire change will take place.
I think Ayushman has one more question. I think this will be the last question we will be taking, and afterward I will have some discussion with Sarika, and then we'll close down. So Ayushman, I'm unmuting you.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I just wanted to ask you two questions. Firstly, does the master plan have thought about e-bikes and the infrastructure for charging stations for e-bikes or e-vehicles? Secondly, is there any proposition, like in New York and London, you have places where you can rent a bike for a certain time and then park it at someplace else for some money? So is that also involved in the plan? That's
Yeah, these are really good questions. About the e-bikes, yes, like I told you that in the commercial parking lots, we are saying that e-bike should have free parking. So that is our way of, saying that, um, of encouraging e-bikes. There is another thing that in the multi-utility zones of the road section, we are at places wherever the area permits, there will be a way to park your car and charge it. Otherwise, there will be this battery swapping stations which will be there as part of the multi-utility zones. So that's how we are going about it. The master plan, again, like I said, it offers a framework within which all these provisions can be made. So there are certain norms which will mandate that the center to center distance, or let's say the catchment area of each parking of each charging facility or a battery swapping station would be, say, X meters. So that is how the stations would be located equidistantly across the city and not concentrated in a certain part of the city, increasing their outreach and benefit to the entire city. That answers your first question. The second question about rent a bike is that there are multiple private entrepreneurs, players who are involved with this. So the government is now strategizing how to incentivize these people, and but I think it will all rent a bike kind of systems will of course work, but they will again work on certain routes. So there is this public bicycling system that we have, PBS. So again, the issue with that is that the origin and the destination is defined in that. So in that limits the catchment, the users get limited, because a person who's like leaving India Habitat Center and going to Lodi Road, only that person will be able to take that bike, because there is a station where you surrender that bike at the Lodi Road station. So instead of that, we are hoping that it should be a more open thing. There could be an app which is developed where there are huge number of cycles. You can pick up the cycle from anywhere, park it anywhere that you want. That kind of a flexibility we have to bring in the system, and the master plan will be propagating this entire system.
Thank you, Sarika, for such an interactive presentation. I think it is among one of those presentations where we have so many questions asked by the audience. I have one question to ask, which might not be pertinent to just this subject matter per se, but might be pertinent to most of the things which we are trying to do for making a better city, or making a better system for our lives post-COVID. So these are just too many proposals. I have this fear of that when we approach too many things, almost none of them happen. I will give you an example, is that even in Calcutta, there are 42 different departments or agencies or organizations which look towards the overall traffic management system. The result is that there are too many things to do. There are too many modes. It's basically there are too many monkeys in the jungle, and everyone is trying to just throw the monkey on someone else's back. So as a result, what happens is that most of them, these proposals are lost between the noise of implementing this and that. Though we say that we need an integrated mobility plan to manage most of the things, but because this integration itself becomes such a chaotic process that most of them are implemented in a very haphazard manner. So what are your point of view or your perspective about implementing all of these things which you have been talking about from the beginning of the webinar?
Well, all these things, I understand that there are too many things on the plate, and implementing them will become an issue. But what actually precedes implementation is planning. Okay, so what is also happening, that master plan should not be understood as a mobility plan. Master plan in no way is a mobility plan. So there is a mobility plan which will have to be made for Delhi. At the moment, there is no mobility plan which is there in Delhi. Who will make the mobility plan? This brings us to the second question. So there is no unified metropolitan transport authority. You must have heard this word again and again theoretically also. And there are around 15 UMTAs which are now functional in India, in different cities of India, but none in Delhi. Delhi also becomes complex because we have two systems of operations here. We have a central government system, then we have the state government. These agencies don't speak to each other. There's no cohesion. Subsequently, the planning, it suffers. So what we are actually, UMTA again is a word which was there in the master plan 2021 and even the master plan before that. But with 2041 is that we are actually making a framework wherein this thing of institutionally integrating Delhi actually fructifies. So we are still in the process of actually making that proposal, but this is one of the major things that the transport strategies is going to advocate. So what we need in the city is that we need a plan. So the plan will be made by this authority. If not this authority, the master plan will say that from the existing authorities, this is one authority who will function as a UMTA. Okay, so whatever is feasible, that will be recommended. And the master plan, in addition to institutional integration, will definitely advocate operational and systematic integration. That is extremely important. So, for instance, if a bus arrives at a bus stop which is near the metro station, the frequency of the buses should somehow be in sync with the frequency and headways and everything of the, should align themselves with the frequencies and headways of the metro. So this kind of things have to be done. So once this operational and systematic integration is in place, perhaps all these things that we are talking about, which have been talked about in the past also, will become implementable, and we'll see the benefits of that.
Okay, I think that was a very informative presentation. I think the presentation discussion was also a lot of has a lot of new ideas attached to them, and people asked different question about the behavioral aspect of it. We also talked about the weather dimension of it, and I hope that someday we will be having this urban joint mass transit authorities and the combined integrated plans will actually be implemented, something like Transport for London or New York City Transit, which has an integrated framework for their transportation aspect. And I hope that this happens while COVID can be used as a disruptive time for such innovations to be done in a faster manner. Okay, so outside that, I will say thank you for everyone else to joining this webinar. The center has put a series of webinars, and this was the 8th one, and we are going to have 2 more in the coming week or so, 2 or 3 more in the coming week. So I will request you to kindly uh, keep updating through remain updated through your mails, and please join in the coming weeks also. So we will be there will be an interesting webinar at the closer, which actually is going to we'll be talking about the morbidness of these pandemics and lockdown, that what has happened and what has not happened from the psychological perspective. So please join the upcoming webinars on Thursdays and Fridays and Saturdays. Till then, it's thank you for from the Capabri and JGBS, and then we will meet again in the coming webinar. Thank you for your participation. Okay, stay safe and have a good day.
Thank you.